So now that we know our plugin is installed and running successfully, we can begin building out some of these views and building out the user interface and making this really come to life. So if you go to digital downloads here, we want to make this product or any product actually have a trial download so that we have something to test with. So if we go back into our admin area, you can go to products, manage products, and I'm just gonna search for this product, and we'll say edit, and we just want to make sure that we have this downloadable product thing checked, and also that we have has sample download file checked. And for this we can just upload any old file. That really doesn't matter what the file is, so I'm just going to use a stock image. And then we can save this. And if we go back to our store here, you'll see this download sample button appears now that there's a file attached to it. And if you hit download, you get your picture. And of course, this is what we're trying to change. So we need to start by overriding some of the view behavior here. And Nop does a good job of breaking out different parts of the UI into partial views and smaller views and stuff like that. So this download button is actually its own view inside of Nop, or its own partial view. So if you go to nop.web, I did some digging and I found, if you go under views, product, there's a view called download sample. This is the view we want to override. If you see there's this button here inside of this div with a download sample class, this HTML corresponds to this button. So go ahead and just copy that view file out and paste it into our own views folder. And now we're going to begin modifying this. To make things easy, I decided to use Bootstrap because it has some really easy modal dialogues and stuff built in. So you can see if you click this, you get like this nicely styled pop-up and everything like that. So really we just want to replace the download button of Nop with this button. So I just kind of copied and modified the sample code. If we go back to our solution here, I'm just going to paste in some of the code, and we still want that to be inside of this conditional of if model.has sample download. And then we actually want to move this link into its own view file, because after they submit the form successfully, we'll want to still return that link to them. So I'm just going to add a new item here quick and call this download link.cshtml. And we're just going to cut that out and move it into here. And then we can go ahead and start fixing up this download sample. We have some duplicate code here, so I'll just delete that. And there's a couple other things we need to add up here kind of by our using statements. Let's add in using system and using nop.web.framework.ui. You might notice I'm getting all kinds of red lines on a lot of these razor syntax areas. This is kind of a known issue with Nop. I know other people have this issue as well, where since this is a class library, Razor doesn't correctly parse these files. It actually happens in projects outside of Nop too with Visual Studio. I've seen some weird ways of fixing it. Some work for some people. I haven't found a way that works for me yet, but if you have any suggestions, feel free to leave a comment. I haven't been able to get Razor working in these types of projects, but luckily for us, we're not going to be using Razor too heavily, so it shouldn't be a big deal. But now this is basically complete as far as the HTML goes, but we do need to add in our actual Bootstrap CSS and JavaScript. So I'm just going to add that through either a NuGet package, or you can just go out and download the files. It'd actually be easier if I just grab these off of my file system. So I'm going to go ahead and just create 2 more folders, one for scripts and one for styles. And over on my other screen, I'm just going to copy the bootstrap.js as well as bootstrap.css. And I just got these from the Bootstrap site. If you just download the generic Bootstrap package, there will be those files in there. So after those are added to your project, we're just going to use a Nop helper that I just pasted in here. And what this does is it adds, inside of nop.web.framework.ui, there's some extension methods defined that extend HTML and Razor so that we can add script parts and add CSS file parts. And really you just pass the URL to where those are located in your solution. And sorry, I just jumped between files here. So this will go ahead and add them to the head of your document or at the end of your document, and that just kind of helps you manage files rather than including them in raw HTML or whatever. We also want to make sure that we mark these as copy always so they actually get put out on the file system, or else our references won't be able to grab them. And then we just want to clean our plugin and rebuild that. Oh, and also make sure that you set these views as copy always, and you can mark those as content too if you want. So now hopefully we should get our new download sample file served up along with our Bootstrap JavaScript and CSS. So I'm just going to clean and rebuild this one more time. And then let's go and reload our project page and just see where we're at. Oh, okay, so I defined an HTML.action for our new entry form, which is the part of the modal where people will actually fill out their information. I'm just going to comment this out for now just so that we can get this running. That's going to pull in another partial view that we're going to build in a second. So after that reloads, you can see we still have our download sample button, but now if we click on it, we don't get a download file and we get our modal dialog. And that line that I commented out is going to inject a form in the middle here. So let's actually work on that right now. Because we define this new entry as an HTML.action, it's actually going to hit our controller. So I'm just going to uncomment that. And if we go into that controller file, we just want to add a new action result for new entry. And we're just going to return a view. And later we're going to build a second new entry action result for our post back, but for now we just need to return the view. So let's just say add new item into our views folder. And we'll just call this new entry dot CSHTML. And then we can go ahead and I'm just going to copy this HTML in here and we'll walk through it. So at the top here we're defining our model, which is a trial tracker record, and we're bringing in a couple using statements. This system.webframework.ui is is to get access to this nop.label4. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit later. And these validation messages I'm just going to delete for now because we're also going to revisit that later. So we should get these strongly typed fields for the customer name, the customer email, and the product name, which are all defined in our trial record. So also remember to mark this as copy always again and set it to content. And we'll save that, and we'll save our controller. The last thing we need to do to get this to work is to actually define a new route. So if we go into here, actually I take that back, we aren't going to need a route because since it's just an HTML.action, it's going to post back to the same controller because we didn't specify a different controller. So if we look at our download sample, or we specified the same controller, so it's just going to post back to that. So now if we go ahead and just clean and build one more time. And looks like we hit an error here. And this is because since we modified our controller, Nop actually caches controllers on startup. So I'm just going to restart the solution here by cleaning and building this and just building the solution again. So that is one caveat, is that you do have to restart the application when you change the controller, whereas with these other files, just a clean and rebuild will work for you. So I'll let this start up for a sec. And now if we navigate back to our trial download, you can see we get our two fields here. The formatting is a little bit off. Let me see if I can fix that real quick. I'm just going to adjust some of this, some of these HTML editor helpers here to make this a little bit better. We just want to make sure both of these say text box 4, and that'll allow us to pass in an anonymous object here with some HTML parameters. So I'm just going to say class with form control and make these consistent. So one of the overloads of text box 4 allows you to pass in a class, but you have to prefix it with the @ sign since class is a reserved word in C#. So I'm just going to clean and build this one more time. And refresh. And now you can see we have some clean and consistent formatting. And we're going to talk about how to name these a little bit better and give them sort of a friendly name. Right now it's just displaying the property name of that field in the database. So I'm going a little bit long on this video, but this is one of the more, there's just a lot of steps to this part. So just to kind of rehash, we have this download sample file that we added in our Bootstrap HTML to, and we added our Bootstrap JavaScript and CSS files to our project in these folders, and then we included them with these extension methods up here so that they get included on our front end page here. And then we also added a new entry action result to our controller so that our form is sort of its own little view, and we built out that view here with our trial tracker record. So in the next video, we're going to look at actually submitting this form and handling that on our controller. So now we want to work on actually submitting our form. If we take a look at what we have here, we want to set things up so that when the user submits this form, if it's a valid form, then this center here gets replaced with a download button. If it's not a valid form, the form comes back and it has some validation messages. And we're not going to do the validation in this video, but we'll look at that later. So the easiest, that's part of the reason why this was built as two views. It's so that this middle part can be sort of swapped in and out without having to, redo all the Bootstrap stuff and worrying about reattaching the JavaScript events and stuff. So what we're going to do is, if we go into our download sample, we're just going to add a little snippet of JavaScript in here. This is actually pretty straightforward, but we're basically just saying, on document ready, when they click the new entry button, which is this button, the submit button, excuse me, you can see that we named that new entry up here. We're just going to get some data from the page and assign it into variables. So their temporary name is just going to be the customer name field value. Email is going to be the email field value. And then we also want the product ID. And the reason we want this is so that when it gets saved to the database, we can look up the name of the product that ID corresponds to. So if you look at the add to cart button out here, if we inspect this, you can see that we've got this add to cart button class, and all I'm really doing is selecting that button and then getting its data attribute. Sorry, so if we go back in here, you can see the data dash product ID is 53. Nop will automatically print out the product ID onto the cart button every time, and that was the most reliable place to get the ID from. So after we get that ID, we just assign those three variables into an object that we can pass through as JSON. So here I'm just using the jQuery .post, which will go to this URL, and it'll pass through that data, and then our controller is going to return either the download link or the form with validation. So on this return function, or this callback function, we're basically just replacing all of the HTML inside of the modal body container with the response from the server. So if we look at the modal body, that is up here. So you can see our center content area will get replaced with whatever the server returns. So what this means is that we need to create a new entry action result on our controller. So if I go in here and I say public action result, new entry, and in order to differentiate these, we're going to say HT post, and by adding this, if I can type this right, and by adding that annotation there, this method will only be called by MVC when the request type is a post. So I'm just going to paste in some code here. I know pasting can be kind of annoying, but it saves time. So there's a couple things that we need to do to wire all this up. First of all, our action result needs to accept a parameter of a trial record, and I'm just going to call this VM for view model. And we're going to use the bind attribute here and just tell it to include the values that are being passed through in the JSON, so that way we know that we don't get any rogue values, or we just know that we end up with the data we're expecting. The bind will it's just a built-in MVC thing that only binds the specified property names. So we're going to say customer name, customer email, and product ID. So, oh, and put in our bracket there. Now you can see we have this product service. We actually need to add this into our controller constructor. Nop provides something called a product service that just lets you access information about products in the product catalog. So you can see we just pulled in the namespace nop.services.catalog, and this already has its dependency injection set up. So I'm just going to call this product service, and then inside the constructor we'll just say product service equals product service and build out our field stub. And here we want to just make sure that we replace that with our trial repository name. So probably didn't save that much time to copy and paste this in, but just to review here, that JavaScript is going to post to this method, and it's going to bind these three properties, which were the properties we specified in the JSON. And then if model state.valid, we're just putting here for future use when we add in model validation, because it'll make sure that the right data gets bound to the fields. Otherwise it's just going to return our view again. And when you say return view from, if you return the same view that's linked to the action method, all of that model validation info will get funneled directly into the view. We'll look at that later. So here we're actually just looking up our product by that ID that we passed in. So we get our product back, and then we assign the view model product name as the product that we got back, the name of that. And then we set the download date to just datetime.now, and we pass in a formatting string. And then we insert that new trial tracker record directly into the repository. And since all this was successful, because the model state was valid, then we return the view of download link. So remember, this VM just represents a trial tracker record. We haven't looked at this in a while, but we're basically just filling out the customer name and email directly with what they submitted. We're getting the product name using the product ID and the product service, and then we're just populating the download date ourselves. So if we go back to our controller here, that should be working properly, and we're actually going to have to clean and build our solution and rerun it since we modified the controller. So I'm just going to rerun this and pause the video a second. So the store should load for you. I forgot to mention, I ran this using just F5 so that it attached the debugger, and then I set a breakpoint inside our method so that we can make sure that it hits. So if we go back to digital downloads, we go to our product, and now if I say download sample, if I just enter some test information and I say submit, you can see that it does hit our action method and it hits our breakpoint. If for some reason it doesn't hit, just try cleaning your project and rebuilding it, and then just building and running the solution again. But now we can see that it hits this method and the model state is valid, because if we examine our view model here, it only bound the properties that we requested. And then the product ID is 53, and so the product we get back is, well, I mean, you can read through all this, but we got our product back, and we set our download date, and now that it's going to insert the new product into our repository, and then if we continue, it's going to return our download sample. Now this download link doesn't work at the moment because there's a slight issue we'll have to fix. If you remember, we copied the original NopCommerce download link into this download link view. We actually need to change this model.id to model.product.id, and then at the top here we just want to change this to use a trial tracker record. Originally it uses a NopCommerce product view model or something like that, but by specifying a trial tracker record, when we pass that into the download link view, that already has the ID. It's just now called a product ID on our new view model. So it's the same ID, it's just coming from a different model, and so we just have to update that to make sure that it gets the right one. And then we can just make this a little nicer and just say, thanks for downloading the trial. And the last thing we want to do is make sure that that submit button goes away so that they don't click it again and just resubmit nothing, basically. I'm just going to use kind of a little cheat for that. When it comes back, it just sets the submit button to display none. There's better ways to do this, but I didn't want to spend the time on it right now. So if we clean and rebuild this, so let's clean and build. And now if we refresh our view, it looks like the application stopped running. Let me just restart this quick. So I just restarted the application and navigated to this spot. And if we say download sample, I actually just filled it out as a test. But if we refresh the page and say download sample, and I'll say Alex and test, and now if we submit, and now if we click the button, then you can see we actually get our file back. So the basic functionality of our plugin is kind of there already. Obviously we have to do a lot of cleanup and the admin page and everything, but you can see it's coming together. And if we go into our database, we can actually verify that this is working by looking at our trial tracker table and selecting just selecting the rows from it. You can see that it's actually entering these in the database. So we've got our customer name and email, and you can see it's even entering the date in the right format and everything like that. We've got this stray ID column, but we can look at that later. So looks like we're in pretty good shape, and in the next lesson we're going to look at starting to build out some of the admin functionality. So next we want to look at completing our admin area, and I opened up a page in NopCommerce just to kind of show you or remind you what we're going to be doing. If you go through NopCommerce, you'll notice that everything has sort of this nice grid look to it, and a lot of them actually allow you to edit in line. So like if you click edit, it'll just change these into text boxes so you can edit right here. So that's what we want to build out, and Nop uses Kendo UI, which is actually, I think, really nice, but it can be a little bit intimidating at first to figure out how to implement that kind of grid. But what I basically did was just look at how one of the simpler views in Nop implements it in the admin area, and then just kind of modified and copied that. So inside of nop.admin under presentation, inside of the views folder, if you look under newsletter subscription, this list actually behaves very similar to what we want, and you can see this block here is all of the Kendo UI stuff, and it basically updates or accepts a read, update, and destroy command and passes in various fields and parameters that talk back and forth to your controller. So I basically just took this code sample right here and rebuilt that in the plugin. So I'm just going to copy in what I came up with. This took a little bit of trial and error, but remember, you can always download the source code for this tutorial and just copy it out of there. I'm not going to type all this out because that would take forever. You can also look at samples on Kendo UI's website for their grid, but you can see that it starts out by declaring an item to attach the grid to, so we just need to create that real quick. And all you have to do is give it that ID. So we've got trials grid, and then Kendo UI will take care of building the grid inside of this element. That's all you have to do. And if you just kind of read through this, most of it is pretty self-explanatory. So read is what populates the list, and that maps to a controller action, which in our case is the trial tracker controller get trials method. The update matches to the update trial action method of the trial tracker controller, and delete, and so forth. And down here we just define the fields that we're gonna want to be working with, and these sort of just correspond to our model that we built, our trial tracker record. And then some of this other stuff are just various Kendo UI options like paging and filtering and stuff like that. You can look into the documentation if you want to know what every single one of these does. The important part is this fields up here, and then the columns are what actually get displayed. So you just pass in a field which corresponds to the fields we declared up here that map to our model, and then you give it a title. So I just plugged in a more friendly name for each of these, adding in the space and making it a little bit more readable. And you can adjust the sizing as needed. But this worked out pretty well for me. And then down here, this commands part, this generates buttons that allow you to do things on click. So the edit will turn it into an editable grid, and destroy will obviously delete. And then I just plugged in some Nop string resources so that it'll print out whatever text is saved in Nop as the edit button or the delete button. So really just kind of read through this or download the source code and play around with it. It's not as bad as it looks, so if you spend some time with it, you should get pretty comfortable. And then we just have to create our corresponding controller action. So you can see here we've got our new entry that we created in the previous video, and we've got our manage up here, which just loads the initial page. So we're actually going to add in 3 more methods, and the first one that we need is our get trials action. So let me just close some of this other stuff here. So you can see our read method that populates the list maps to get trials on our trial tracker controller. So the get trials method that I just pasted in here is really simple. You just have it accept a data source request command as its parameter, and then the Kendo UI references that we add will take care of populating that. So we're actually not even using that in this method, but you can just say we're going to use our trials repository to just get the whole table, so all of the items in the table, and then convert it to a list. And then a grid model is a new data source result, and then we can just map the trials onto the data, and the total is just the trials.count. And then we say return JSON, which is something that MVC can return by default as one of its action results. It's returning a JSON result. And then we just pass in our grid model. And if we look at this data source result, you can see that's part of Kendo UI. So the JavaScript that's going to receive this will know what to do with it, because we assign the data and the total and everything like that. So just make sure that you have those references included, and that you kind of map your data to the right objects and stuff like that. And then we need to add in our update method. And if we look at this one, we're actually posting data back to our controller, and we're passing in a trial tracker record so that the JSON will map to our trial tracker record. And the next thing we have to do is actually get the item we're updating out of our database. So we just say trial repository.get by ID, and then we want the same item that we're updating, so we pull out the item that has the same ID, and we save that as a trial. And then we just go through the properties and update the old model with the new model values, and then we just call trial repository.update, and Kendo will actually update those values locally through JavaScript, so we don't have to actually return the updated item, and then when you refresh the page it's pulling from the database fresh, so it'll get the updated items then. And then our last method is just our delete trial, which I'll add in right here. And this one is also pretty simple. It just accepts the ID of the item we're deleting, which gets passed in through our Kendo UI JavaScript. And then in our trial repository, we get by ID to find that. And then we just say trial repository.delete, and then we return a null JSON result again, because Kendo will just remove that from the grid on the client side, and then it won't exist from the database the next time you refresh the page. So one last thing that we need to do is add in our routes so that these calls know where they should get mapped to. And these look pretty much like the other route we have here, so I'm just going to add in all three. I just named them similar, but I called it get trial, delete trial, and update trial. And of course that still maps to our trial tracker controller, and you just put in the names of the methods we just created. I'm just going to move this below update just so it's consistent with our controller. But if we go ahead and save these two, then we can clean and build our project. And then let's just build our solution and make sure that's intact. And now if we run this, and we head over to our administration page under plugins, you can see that now we have this nice grid that's populating our two tests that we already saved. If it looks like this grid shows up but there's nothing in it and it's empty, that's probably because you need to go and actually fill out the test form and submit a couple entries. But you can see if we edit this and I say Battle of Los Angeles 2, and then I delete this second one here, when we refresh the page, you can see everything is all set and that it's updated to our database. So that's sort of the main management options. The one thing we still need to take care of is this on mailing list. Although it updates on the grid here, it doesn't actually add it to the mailing list yet, so we need to include that and a couple other settings excuse me, just to really polish up this admin area. So that's what we'll be looking at next.